Close your eyes and let the heavy curtains of the present world fall away, leaving you in a space of quiet, velvet darkness where the only light comes from the ancient sun rising over a landscape that no longer exists. Imagine the air filling your lungs, crisp and impossibly clean, carrying the scent of pine needles warming in the morning light, the sharp tang of ozone from a distant thunderstorm, and the earthy, humid perfume of soil that has been locked under ice for 1,000 generations and is finally, miraculously, breathing again. You can hear the rhythmic musical drip of water, billions of tiny rivulets cascading off white cliffs of ice, a symphony of melting that sounds like 1,000,000,000,000 tiny bells ringing in the return of life. And beneath your feet, the ground is soft, spongy with moss and the first brave wildflowers pushing up through the thawing tundra. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now, let us drift back, far back, to a time roughly 14,600 years ago, a period scientists call the Bölling-Allerud Interstadial, but which you might feel simply as the Great Thaw, a time when the earth is shaking off the heavy white slumber of the last glacial maximum and stretching its limbs in the newfound warmth. We are standing on the edge of a world that believes the winter is over, a world intoxicated by the heat of a sun that feels closer, kinder, and more generous than it has in 20,000 years. To the north, the Great Laurentide Ice Sheet, a monumental wall of white that once crushed the continent of North America under kilometers of ice, is retreating, groaning, and cracking as it pulls back like a receding tide of frozen crystal. It leaves behind a scarred, wet landscape of gravel and raw earth, but life is rushing in to fill the void with a speed that defies the slow, patient ticking of geological time. Forests of spruce and birch are marching northward, their roots gripping the rocky soil, their leaves turning the sunlight into a canopy of trembling green that shelters a cast of creatures so magnificent they seem like myths to our modern eyes. Here, in the golden light of this false spring, we see the woolly mammoth, not struggling in a blizzard as we often imagine, but wading contentedly through a lush wetland, its massive curved tusks sweeping aside tall grasses to reach the tender shoots beneath. A calf, shaggy and playful, splashes in a pool of meltwater, shaking its head with a clumsiness that makes a nearby ground sloth pause its slow, deliberate chewing to watch. The sloth, a creature of immense patience, seems to operate on a different timescale entirely, moving with a dignified lethargy that suggests he knows there is no rush, for the summer seems endless. Historians and paleontologists still argue about the precise color of the mammoth's coat, whether it was a uniform dark brown or varied with lighter reddish hues like a modern muskox. But in the dappled light of this ancient afternoon, the fur gleams with a rich, earthy copper tone. We drift further, like a ghost on the wind, across the expanding grasslands where herds of ancient horses and camels, yes, camels in the Americas, graze in the thousands, their hooves drumming a low, rolling thunder against the earth. The air is thick with the buzz of insects and the calls of migratory birds returning to claim the new lakes formed by the melting ice. And there, moving silently through the birch trees, are the shadows of our ancestors, the people of the Clovis culture. They are not the brutish cavemen of fiction, but sophisticated, intelligent explorers, their eyes scanning the horizon with a mixture of awe and calculation. We see a craftsman sitting by a fire, his hands moving with practiced rhythmic grace as he strikes a piece of flint, flaking off razor-sharp shards to create the iconic fluted point that will define his people for millennia. He pauses to wipe sweat from his forehead, for the day is genuinely hot, a sweltering reminder that the Ice Age is fading into memory. He looks at his children playing in the tall grass and feels a sense of security, a belief that the world is getting better, easier, and more abundant with each passing generation. It is a common human myth, this idea that progress is a straight line, that once the darkness lifts, it is gone forever. But the earth operates on cycles far more chaotic and circular than our hopeful hearts care to admit. The warmth of the boiling Alarud is real, but it is fragile, balanced on a knife edge of ocean currents and atmospheric pressure that are about to be tested. As the glaciers melt, they are not just disappearing, they are transforming into water, vast, incomprehensible oceans of fresh water pooling in the interior of the continents. To the north of where our Clovis hunter sits, a colossal lake is forming, known to us as Lake Agassiz, a body of water larger than all the modern Great Lakes combined, held back only by a dam of weakening ice. It sits there, shivering in the sunlight, a silent, sleeping giant of cold blue water, waiting for the moment the dam breaks. But for now, the dam holds. The sun sets, painting the sky in violent, beautiful shades of bruised purple and burning orange, and the temperature drops, but only enough to be refreshing. The stars come out, bright and hard in the clear prehistoric sky, the same constellations we know, but shifted slightly by the wobble of the Earth's axis. The hunter wraps a fur around his shoulders, not out of fear of freezing, but for comfort, listening to the hoot of an owl and the distant mournful cry of a dire wolf pack starting their nightly hunt. The world feels stable. It feels permanent. The catastrophic cold of the past seems like a story the elders tell to frightened children, a nightmare from which humanity has fully awakened. The flowers bloom, the ice recedes, and the earth breathes in deep, satisfied sighs of thermal expansion, unaware that this spring is a deception, a brief, beautiful interlude before the climate system, pushed to its breaking point by the very meltwater it created, prepares to snap back with a violence that will freeze the flowers where they stand. We linger here in this twilight of comfort, letting the warmth soak into our skin, feeling the peace of a world that is teeming with life, blissfully ignorant of the turning tide, finding a strange, melancholy beauty in the innocence of these moments before the fall. The wind picks up, just a little, rustling the leaves of the Dryas octopetala, that small, 8-petaled flower that currently blooms only in the high mountains, but is waiting, deep in the seed bank of the soil, for the signal to reclaim the lowlands. The narrative of the earth is written in these layers of pollen and ice, a story not of slow, gradual shifts, but of sudden lurching changes, and as the moon rises, silver and cold, over the retreating glacier, we can almost hear the first whispered warning of the return of the ice, a secret kept by the deep ocean currents that are beginning to slow, faltering like a heartbeat skipping a rhythm. The shift does not begin with a roar of thunder or the crash of a comet, at least not in the way the wind first touches your skin. It begins as a subtle betrayal of the air, a sharpening of the breeze that carries a bite, no longer playful, but predatory, slicing through the warmth of the boiling Alarud interstadial with a cold knife of inevitability. We remain suspended in this ancient timeline, hovering roughly 12,900 years in the past, watching the invisible machinery of the planet grind its gears in a sudden violent downshift that will confound climatologists more than 10 millennia later. The heat that had been gently coaxing the ice sheets backward, the warmth that had allowed the birch forests to creep bravely toward the Arctic Circle, suddenly falters, like a candle flame starved of oxygen in a sealed room. In the span of a single human lifetime, perhaps even less, merely a few years, according to the most granular analysis of Greenland's frozen archives, the average temperature of the northern hemisphere plummets by a staggering 10 degrees Celsius. It is a climatic whiplash so severe that if it were to happen today, you would be swapping your swimsuit for a parka between breakfast and dinner, and the meteorologist who predicted mild with a chance of sun would likely be chased out of town. This is the onset of the Great Reversal, a period where the Earth, having seemingly decided it was finished with the Ice Age, suddenly changes its mind and plunges back into the freezer. We watch the transformation unfold across the landscape of Northern Europe and North America, seeing the green canopy we admired just moments ago begin to shudder and fail. The mechanism of this disaster is hidden deep beneath the waves of the Atlantic, where the great oceanic conveyor belt, the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, which ferries warm, salty tropical water northward to heat the lands of the high latitudes, has stalled. It is as if the radiator of the planet has been turned off. The leading theory, the one whispered by the sediments of the ocean floor, suggests that the bursting of that colossal ice-dammed lake we saw earlier, Lake Agassiz, unleashed a torrent of fresh water so vast it diluted the salinity of the North Atlantic, making the water too light to sink, thus jamming the gears of this global heat engine. But to the family of hunter-gatherers we are watching, camped on the edge of a meadow in what is now modern-day Belgium, there is no theory, only the biting reality of a winter that refuses to leave. They wait for the spring thaw, for the return of the sun's strength, but the sun remains distant, a pale coin in a milky white sky. The snow, usually gone by the time the first buds appear, keeps falling, layer upon layer, a relentless, quiet accumulation that buries the familiar paths and landmarks. The psychological weight of this change is heavy. Imagine the confusion of the elders, whose wisdom of the seasons passed down for generations is suddenly rendered obsolete by a sky that no longer follows the rules. There is a dark irony here, for the very heat that melted the glaciers created the water that shut down the heat. Nature, it seems, has a dry sense of humor, though in this case, it is a very cold, wet, and unforgiving one. We move closer to the campfire, which has grown larger and is tended with a desperate obsession now. The circle of light it casts is smaller, pressed in by a darkness that feels thicker, colder, and more permanent. The people are huddled closer together, their furs pulled tight, their breath misting in the air like dragon smoke. They do not know it yet, but they are entering the Younger Dryas, a geological blink of an eye that will last for over 1,000 years, 40 generations of shivering, 40 generations of stories told about the long summer of the past that eventually become legends of a golden age lost to the frost. The landscape itself begins to retreat in shock. The trees, those optimistic birches and pines that had marched north, find their roots locked in permafrost that is creeping back up from the depths of the soil. We see the leaves browning and curling not from autumn senescence, but from the sheer inability to draw water from the frozen ground. The silence of the land deepens. The chorus of frogs that once heralded the evening falls mute. The insects vanish, and the air loses that humid, earthy smell of growth, replaced by the sterile, metallic scent of snow and dust. Scientists analyzing the ice cores from this period, specifically the North Greenland Ice Core Project, have found that the transition was shockingly abrupt, marked by a sharp line in the ice where the isotope ratios swing wildly, a chemical signature of a world-changing gears at breakneck speed. It is a humbling reminder of the chaotic non-linearity of our climate system, a beast that does not always wake slowly, but can snap its jaws shut in an instant. Across the Atlantic, the impact is just as severe, but manifests differently. The storm tracks shift, pushing moisture away from the interior, turning the lush grasslands where the mammoths grazed into arid, wind-swept steppes. The great herds are confused. We see a massive bull mammoth, his breath freezing on his long eyelashes, pausing to dig through the hardening snow crust to find the grasses that are becoming scarcer and less nutritious. He looks up, trunk testing the wind, sensing that the ancient pathways his ancestors walked are no longer safe, that the world under his feet is becoming hostile. The dire wolves, too, feel the pinch. The cold makes the hunt harder, the energy cost of moving through deep snow higher, and their pups whine in the den, hungry and cold. Yet, in this bleakness, there is a terrible crystalline beauty. The aurora borealis, fueled by the same solar winds that buffet the atmosphere, dances with an intensity that seems brighter in the colder, clearer air, painting the snow in curtains of neon green and blood red, a celestial light show for an audience fighting for survival. The lakes freeze over with ice so thick it booms and cracks like thunder in the night, shifting under its own weight. We float over this frozen tapestry, feeling the immense stillness of a hemisphere locked in a suspended breath. It is a time of contraction, of holding on. The expansive optimism of the thaw is gone, replaced by a gritty determination to endure. The human spirit, however, is forged in such fires, or rather, in the lack of them. We see the ingenuity of our ancestors sparking in the cold. They begin to sew their clothes tighter, using bone needles to create layered garments that trap air, inventing the very concept of insulation that we still use today in our puffy coats. They dig their dwellings deeper into the earth, using the ground's thermal mass to escape the biting wind. They are not giving up. They are adapting, proving that while the climate can change the rules of the game instantly, the players are resourceful enough to learn the new strategy, even if they have to do it with frozen fingers. The Great Reversal is not just a climate event. It is a test, a gauntlet thrown down by the planet, demanding to know if life is tenacious enough to stay. As we drift away from the flickering campfire and back into the swirling snow, we notice something small on the ground, almost invisible against the white expanse, a patch of soil exposed by the wind, where a specific hardy seed has just landed, carried by the gale from the high alpine peaks, ready to root in this new, harsh reality. It is a tiny botanical invader that will give its name to this entire epic of ice, a humble messenger that the cold is here to stay, and its story is just beginning to bloom in the frost. We descend now, spiraling down from the high auroral skies to the intimate level of the earth itself, where the true story of this epic is being written not in fire or ice, but in the quiet, stubborn architecture of a single flower. It begins with that solitary seed we saw tumbling across the frozen crust, a tiny, serrated speck of life finding purchase in the gravelly ruin of what was once a warm forest floor. This is the Dryas octopetala, the mountain avens, a plant that possesses a deceptively delicate beauty, with 8 creamy, papery petals that surround a heart of sunny yellow stamens, looking for all the world like a misplaced daisy that has decided to go camping in the Arctic. In the timeline of the Earth, this flower is the herald of the cold, a botanical signal flare that announces the arrival of the tundra. As the temperature plummets across Europe, the great forests of pine and birch that had established themselves during the warm interlude begin to suffocate. Their needles turn brittle and brown, their sap freezes in their veins, and they stand like gray skeletons against the darkening horizon, creating a ghost forest that whistles mournfully in the wind. But where the trees fail, the Dryas thrives. It is a master of minimalism, a survivalist of the plant world that hugs the ground in low, dense mats to escape the scouring wind, turning its leaves, which resemble tiny, tough oak leaves, giving the plant its name after the wood nymphs or dryads of Greek mythology, toward the weak sun to catch every photon of available energy. We watch in time-lapse as this floral invasion sweeps across the continent, a silent white tide replacing the green canopy. From the highlands of Scandinavia to the lowlands of the Netherlands, the landscape undergoes a radical makeover, trading the vertical complexity of the woods for the horizontal austerity of the steppe tundra. It is a slow, creeping conquest, the kind of passive-aggressive takeover that anyone who has ever battled invasive mint in their garden would begrudgingly respect. The Dryas does not fight the cold, it embraces it, using the frost as a shield to keep competitors at bay. To the human inhabitants of these lands, this shift is confusing and terrifying. Imagine a gatherer, a woman whose grandmother told her stories of gathering hazelnuts and berries in these valleys, walking out to forage and finding only these endless carpets of white flowers. They are beautiful, yes, shimmering like fallen stars in the twilight. But you cannot eat a mountain avens, and you certainly cannot burn it to keep your family warm during the nights that are growing longer and crueler. The presence of the flower means the absence of wood, the absence of the shelter that trees provide, and a fundamental shift in the resources available for survival. The Dryas becomes a symbol of the new reality, a beautiful, indifferent marker of the lean times. It is here that we encounter a fascinating intersection of nature and science, for it is this humble flower that will eventually give its name to the entire geological period we are exploring. Future geologists, digging into the peat bogs of Denmark and Sweden, will find layers of sediment packed with the distinctive pollen of this plant, grains that look under a microscope like tiny wrinkled golf balls, sandwiched between layers of tree pollen. They will realize that the climate didn't just slide into cold, it snapped into it, allowing this alpine flower to descend from the mountains and colonize the plains. Historians and geologists often debate the nomenclature, arguing over the precise boundaries of the oldest Dryas, the older Dryas, and our current Younger Dryas, a confusing tripartite naming scheme that makes the era sound like a dynasty of particularly chilly flowers. But the truth recorded in the mud is undeniable. The flower is the witness. We float over the landscape of ancient Ireland, which has been stripped of its fledgling forests almost entirely. The Emerald Isle is, for this millennium, a white and brown isle, covered in snow and dryas scrub. The silence here is profound. Without the trees to break the wind, the air moves in a constant low hiss across the ground, a sound like the earth whispering secrets to itself. The animals that remain are those that can eat the tough, low vegetation, the reindeer, the giant Irish elk with their impossible antlers, and they wander through the flowers, their breath steaming, grazing on the very heralds of their hardship. There's a poignancy to this floral bloom. In the midst of a climatic catastrophe, nature still demands beauty, still demands reproduction. The Dryas flowers turn their heads to follow the sun, a phenomenon known as heliotropism, focusing the solar heat onto their developing seeds and, incidentally, providing a tiny, warm oasis for the few insects brave enough to fly in this cold. It is a microscopic drama of survival, played out billions of times across millions of square kilometers. The flower is not evil, of course. It is simply opportunistic, filling the vacuum left by the retreating warmth. But to the shivering humans watching their world change, it must have seemed like the earth was closing up, sealing itself off under a layer of frost and petals. We see a child plucking one of the flowers, twisting the tough stem, and bringing it to her nose. It has no strong scent, only the clean, cold smell of the air itself. She drops it, and the wind catches it, tumbling it over the permafrost, a tiny white wheel rolling toward the edge of a frozen lake. This proliferation of the Dryas is the land's way of saying that the heat engine is broken, that the energy balance has tipped. While the flower conquers the land, the true architect of this change, the master switch that allowed the Dryas to bloom in the valleys of France, lies far to the west and north in the deep churning waters of the ocean. The land is merely reacting, painting itself white in sympathy with the ice. The cause is liquid, dark, and vastly more powerful. The flower is the warning, the visible symptom of a planetary fever, or rather, a planetary chill that has seized the circulation of the world. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long blue shadows across the fields of Dryas, the white petals seem to glow with an inner luminescence, a ghostly carpet stretching into the night. We leave the silent, flower-strewn plains of Europe, following the pull of the tides, drifting away from the solid earth toward the restless, heaving gray of the Atlantic, where the heat that once kept the forests alive has been stolen, locked away by a mechanism that has suddenly, catastrophically, ceased to function. The flowers bow their heads in the twilight, closing their petals against the coming frost, waiting for a morning sun that will bring light, but no warmth, to a world that has been surrendered to the cold. We leave the white-carpeted fields of Europe and glide westward, moving over the restless pewter-gray expanse of the North Atlantic Ocean. The air here is sharp with salt and the smell of ancient ice, and the sky is a low, oppressive ceiling of bruised clouds. Beneath us, the ocean heaves with a dark, rhythmic power, waves the size of hills rolling in slow motion, their crests whipped into foam by the biting wind. But the real drama, the true catastrophe of the Younger Dryas, is happening not on the surface, but deep in the abyss, in the invisible, silent currents that serve as the planet's circulatory system. For millennia, a colossal underwater river, known as the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC for those who prefer the crisp language of science, has been the heartbeat of the Northern Hemisphere. It acts like a global conveyor belt. Warm, salty water from the tropics travels north along the surface, carrying the heat of the Caribbean sun all the way to the coasts of Britain and Scandinavia. When this warm water reaches the icy north, it cools, becomes denser, and sinks into the depths, flowing back south as a cold, deep current, pulling more warm water up behind it to complete the loop. This cycle is what keeps London from having the same climate as Labrador, despite sharing the same latitude. But now, in the time we are witnessing, the conveyor belt has jammed, the engine has seized. The cause is a massive injection of fresh water, a poison pill for the ocean's mechanics. As we look north toward the melting ice sheets of North America, we see the culprit, the chaotic drainage of Lake Agassiz and other proglacial lakes. This water, fresh and buoyant, does not sink like the heavy, salty ocean water. Instead, it spreads out across the surface of the North Atlantic like a vast, invisible lid, forming a freshwater cap that prevents the warm tropical water from releasing its heat to the atmosphere and, crucially, prevents it from sinking. The vertical pump stops. The heat that should be warming the winds blowing over Europe is trapped in the south, or simply lost to the chaos of the system. We can almost hear the stuttering of the current, a groan of fluid dynamics as the mighty Gulf Stream weakens, curling back on itself, unable to penetrate the wall of cold, fresh water guarding the north. The ocean becomes stratified, stagnant in its vertical movement, and the consequences are immediate and chilling. Without this influx of tropical warmth, the North Atlantic plunges into a thermal deficit. The sea ice, which had been retreating during the Bouling Alarud, surges back with a vengeance, extending its frozen fingers south, locking the ocean surface into a rigid, white silence far south of its usual limits. This expansion of sea ice creates a feedback loop, the albedo effect, where the white ice reflects the sun's weak energy back into space, cooling the planet even further. It is a trap of physics. Cold begets ice, ice reflects heat, and the world gets colder. Floating above this stalled ocean, we sense a profound stillness, a holding of breath. The usual cacophony of seabirds is muted. The nutrient-rich upwellings that feed the plankton, and thus the fish, and thus the birds and whales, are suppressed by the lack of vertical mixing. The ocean is not dead, but it is starving. We might imagine a solitary whale, a giant of the deep, swimming through these confusing waters, searching for the familiar thermal highways that have guided its ancestors for generations, only to find walls of cold water where warmth used to be, its sonic calls echoing in a changed acoustic environment. The shutdown of the AMOC doesn't just freeze the north, it creates a thermal seesaw. While the north shivers, the heat that is no longer being transported northward begins to pile up in the southern hemisphere, a phenomenon scientists call the bipolar seesaw. It is a planetary balancing act where one end crashes down while the other rises, proving that the Earth is a single interconnected organism. You cannot touch one part without sending ripples, or, in this case, shivers, through the whole. Historians and climatologists still debate the exact exit route of the freshwater. Did it flow down the Mackenzie River into the Arctic, or through the St. Lawrence straight into the Atlantic? But the result is the same. The switch was flipped. We drift closer to the water's surface, where icebergs calved from the reinvigorated glaciers drift like ghostly cathedrals through the mist. They are jagged, majestic, and terrifying, carrying rocks and debris from the continent deep into the ocean, dropping them as drop stones into the sediment below, messages in a bottle for future geologists to decode. These stones will tell the story of this frozen armada, a testament to the land's attempt to colonize the sea. The stalled ocean also changes the weather patterns above it. The jet stream, that river of high-altitude wind that steers storms, buckles, and shifts, dragging polar air masses deep into the heart of the continents. The storms that do form are fierce, driven by the intense temperature contrast between the freezing ocean and the remaining warmth further south. We see a squall line approaching, a wall of black clouds scudding across the gray water, unleashing a fury of sleet and freezing rain that lashes the surface, churning the mix of fresh and salt water even further. It is a violent, chaotic atmosphere, a reflection of the ocean's internal turmoil. The heat is there, somewhere, trapped in the tropics, waiting for the conveyor to restart. But for now, the door to the north is slammed shut, barred by a layer of meltwater lighter than the sea, but heavy with consequence. This is the paradox of the Younger Dryas. Global warming caused the melting, which caused the freshwater influx, which caused the cooling. It is a reminder that the climate is not a simple dial you turn up or down, but a complex Rube Goldberg machine where a bucket of water tipped in Canada can freeze a flower in France. As the storm passes and the clouds break for a moment, a shaft of sunlight pierces the gloom, illuminating a lone iceberg in a spotlight of divine indifference. It glows with an inner blue light, cold and ancient, a diamond in the rough sea. The ocean rolls on, indifferent to the suffering on land, caught in its own hydraulic paralysis, waiting for the balance of salt and temperature to tip once more. But for now, the heat is locked away, the current is still, and the north is left to face the ice alone. We turn our gaze from the mesmerizing, terrifying dance of the water and look toward the horizon, where the sky itself is preparing to darken, not from clouds, but from the earth opening its throat in fire. We drift eastward now, leaving the churning, paralyzed Atlantic behind and gliding over the continental heart of Europe, where the land is already shivering under the creeping frost. We arrive in a region that today is known for its serene lakes and rolling hills, the Eifel region of Western Germany, but in this moment, it is the stage for a geological betrayal of explosive proportions. The ground here has been restless for weeks, groaning with deep subsonic vibrations that the local animals have felt in the marrow of their bones. The herds of deer and wild horse have fled, leaving the valley eerily silent save for the bubbling of springs that have suddenly turned hot and foul-smelling. We are hovering over the Lacher Sea, or rather, the landscape that is about to become it. It is not a towering cone-shaped mountain like Fuji or Vesuvius that threatens the sky. It is a hidden monster, a low depression in the earth where magma, rich in gases and desperate to escape, has been pooling just beneath the surface, pressure building like a shaken bottle of champagne held by a nervous giant. Then, the earth simply gives way. It is not just an eruption, it is an excavation. A column of pumice, ash, and gas blasts into the stratosphere, punching a hole in the atmosphere with a violence that creates its own weather system. We watch, safe in our ghostly vantage point, as the pillar of debris collapses and rises again, mushrooming out to blot out the sun. This is the Lacher Sea eruption, a volcanic event of such magnitude that it rivals the famous Pinatubo eruption of the 20th century, but occurring in a world that is already teetering on the edge of a climate cliff. The sound arrives seconds later, a crack so loud it is felt as a physical blow to the chest, a shock wave that flattens the nearby forests of birch and pine like matchsticks. But the true danger is not the noise. It is the silence that follows, the silence of the falling ash. We watch the sky turn a bruised, sickly yellow, then a deep, impenetrable gray. The sun, which was already struggling to warm the cooling earth, is now hidden behind a veil of sulfuric acid droplets and microscopic glass shards. This is the volcanic winter, a phenomenon that acts as a force multiplier for the cooling already begun by the ocean's stagnation. The sulfur dioxide spewed into the upper atmosphere bonds with water vapor to form aerosols, tiny mirrors that reflect the sun's radiation back into space. It is as if the Earth has decided to put on a pair of reflective sunglasses, turning away the very heat it so desperately needs. The temperature drops further, not gradually, but sharply, a cold snap that feels unnatural and predatory. Down below, the fallout begins. The ash, known to geologists as the Lacher Sea tephra, begins to coat the landscape. It falls like a heavy gray snow, distinct from the wet white snow of winter. It is dry, gritty, and carries the smell of hell itself, sulfur and brimstone. We see a small group of humans, likely of the Federmesser culture, who have been camping near the Rhine River. They rush from their hide tents, eyes wide with a terror that has no name. They are used to storms, they are used to cold, they are even used to the occasional tremor of the earth, but they have never seen the day turn to night at noon. They cover their mouths with furs, coughing as the abrasive dust fills their throats. One of them, a young man with a flint knife at his belt, looks up and raises a hand to shield his eyes, but there is no sun to shield against. He wipes a layer of gray dust from his arm, confused by this burning snow that does not melt. There's a grim humor in the universe's timing, a sense that the cosmos is piling on. Just when these people might have figured out how to survive the encroaching ice, the sky decides to throw rocks at them. It's the prehistoric equivalent of having your roof leak on the same day your car breaks down, only the stakes are survival itself. The ash cloud spreads, carried by the winds, drifting as far south as Italy and as far north as Sweden. It settles on the leaves of the dryas flowers we saw earlier, dusting their white petals with gray, creating a stark monochromatic tableau of life under siege. The rivers turn choked and muddy, the fish dying as the water chemistry shifts. The grazing animals, the few that remain, find their grass covered in a gritty layer that grinds their teeth down to the gum. We see a horse shaking its head, sneezing, trying to graze but finding only the taste of rock and dust. This eruption is a critical piece of the puzzle, a smoking gun that many researchers point to as a catalyst for the Younger Dryas. Historians and geologists still debate the precise timing. Did the eruption happen just before the cooling started, acting as the trigger, or did it happen a few hundred years prior, merely weakening the system? The dating is tricky, relying on counting the layers of varves, annual sediment deposits, in ancient lakes, a task that requires the patience of a saint and the eyesight of a hawk. Some argue the eruption was the final straw that broke the camel's back, or the AMOC's back, while others suggest it was just one instrument in a symphony of cooling. But looking at the darkened sky, it is hard to deny its impact. The psychological toll on the human population is immense. The sun is the god of life, the source of warmth, the clock by which they measure their days. To see it defeated, hidden behind a choking cloud, must have felt like a divine judgment. We watch as the Federmesser group packs up their camp in haste, abandoning heavy tools and unnecessary items, driven by a primal urge to flee, though they do not know where to go. Every direction looks the same, gray, cold, and dim. They move like shadows through the ash mist, their footprints leaving dark impressions in the pale dust. The air grows still, heavy with the weight of the suspended particles. The sunsets, when the sun is visible at all, are violent, apocalyptic displays of blood red and violet, created by the light scattering through the volcanic haze. Beautiful, yes, but a beauty that signals starvation. The plants, starved of sunlight, stop photosynthesizing. The food web shudders at its foundation. As the weeks turn into months, the ash settles into the soil, creating a distinct layer that future archaeologists will use as a time marker, a black line in the dirt that says, "This is where the world went dark." But as we drift through this haze, the atmosphere feels charged with a tension that goes beyond volcanism. The volcano was a terrestrial event, a violence born from below. But there are whispers in the data, controversial and contested, that suggest the sky held another threat, something far faster and more energetic than a plume of magma. As the volcanic clouds thin, revealing the cold stars once more, we sense that the universe is not done with this era. The cooling is deep, the ice is returning, and the people are moving. But there is one more theory, one more spectacular and terrifying possibility that looms over this history like a phantom comet. We look up, past the dissipating ash, into the deep velvet of space, where the debate shifts from the fires of the earth to the fires of the heavens, and the mystery of the Younger Dryas deepens into the realm of cosmic catastrophe. The silence returns, but it is a waiting silence, for the sky is a vast place and it does not always stay empty. We remain gazing upward, our eyes tracing the glittering architecture of the prehistoric night, where the Milky Way spills across the zenith like a river of spilled milk, bright enough to cast faint shadows on the snow. But there is a theory, whispered in the halls of academia and shouted in the arenas of alternative history, that suggests this peaceful canopy hid a violent secret. We are entering the realm of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a scientific ghost story that has sparked a civil war among researchers. The theory proposes that the Earth did not just freeze because of ocean currents or volcanoes, but because it ran into a cosmic buzzsaw. Imagine, if you will, a massive comet, a dirty snowball several kilometers wide, originating from the outer dark of the solar system. As it approaches the sun, heat and gravity tear it apart, turning a single bullet into a shotgun blast of debris. A swarm of ice, rock, and dust. This is not the singular dinosaur-killing asteroid that leaves a smoking crater the size of a city. This is something more insidious. We visualize the scenario that proponents argue occurred right around 12,900 years ago. Fragments of this disintegrated comet intersect with Earth's orbit. They do not strike the ground directly, but explode in the upper atmosphere as air bursts, detonating with the force of thousands of nuclear weapons. We watch this hypothetical catastrophe unfold from a safe, silent distance. The sky above North America suddenly ignites. It is not a single flash, but a series of blinding pulses, turning the night into a searing, unnatural day. The heat is so intense that it doesn't just burn, it incinerates. Below, the dry grasses of the prairies, the spruce forests, and the tundra scrub catch fire instantly, creating a continent-spanning conflagration. The sound arrives minutes later, a rolling, chaotic roar that shakes the earth, panic without a visible source. This is the fire from heaven that appears in so many ancient myths, and here we find the seductive friction between legend and geology. Did the ancients witness this? Did the memory of a sky on fire trickle down through oral traditions to become stories of apocalypse? It is a romantic notion, but we must ground ourselves in the mud, specifically in a mysterious layer of sediment found at over 50 sites across North America and Europe, known as the Black Mat. We drift down to an excavation site in modern-day Arizona, peering over the shoulder of a geologist kneeling in a trench. There, sandwiched between the layers of the Clovis era and the desolate times that followed, is a distinct dark stripe of soil, greasy with organic carbon. To the believers of the impact theory, this black mat is the burn layer, the char and ash of a world consumed by wildfires triggered by the cometary airbursts. Inside this layer, they claim to find exotic markers, magnetic microspheres, iridium, and most intriguingly, nanodiamonds. These are microscopic diamonds, smaller than a virus, that form only under pressures so extreme they are usually associated with cosmic impacts or stellar explosions. They are the jewels of destruction, invisible to the naked eye, but shouting a story of violence under the microscope. However, the ghost of skepticism walks these hills alongside us. The scientific community is not easily swayed by flash and drama. They demand reproducibility. And here, the story gets messy. Many teams of researchers have looked for these nanodiamonds and found nothing. Or they have found them, but argue they are common in ordinary geological processes, perhaps formed by natural wildfires or even the fungal decay of wetlands. The black mat, critics argue, is not the scar of a global firestorm, but simply the remnant of peat bogs and wet soils that were common before the climate dried out, essentially just ancient compost. It is a heated debate, sometimes surprisingly personal, proving that scientists, for all their logic, are as passionate and territorial as the ancient hunters we watch. There's a touch of humor in this academic brawl. It seems humanity can argue about the weather even when that weather happened 12,000 years ago. One side sees a cosmic catastrophe, the other sees a really boggy afternoon. Yet, floating here in the ambiguity, we can appreciate the possibility. Even if the impact theory is eventually disproven, it highlights the vulnerability of our planet. We look at the ice sheet again. If an impact did occur, it might have destabilized the glaciers, providing the kick that released the floodwaters to shut down the ocean currents. Perhaps it was a conspiracy of disasters. The volcano weakened the system, the comet kicked the door in, and the ocean locked it shut. We see the smoke from the hypothetical fires drifting up to join the volcanic ash, creating a perfect storm of opacity that blocked the sun. The effect on the ground is undeniable, regardless of the cause. The platinum spike found in Greenland ice cores is real. The cooling is real. The extinction is real. We focus on the psychological impact of such an event on the people of the time. If the sky did explode, it would have shattered their worldview. The heavens, usually the reliable clock of migrations and seasons, became the enemy. We see a group of Clovis people cowering in a rock shelter as the horizon glows with the red light of distant fires. The fear is primal. It is the realization that the earth is not a fortress, but a small raft in a violent universe. Whether caused by a comet or a shift in the wind, the message is the same. The rules have changed. The stability of the generations before is gone. This cosmic question hangs over the Younger Dryas like a question mark drawn in smoke. It challenges us to look at history not as a slow, steady climb, but as a path prone to sudden, violent interruptions. It reminds us that we live in a shooting gallery, even if the bullets usually miss. As the fires, real or metaphorical, die down, they leave behind a changed landscape. The soot settles, the air clears, but it is colder now, much colder. The lush mammoth steppe is gone, replaced by a charred or frozen wasteland. And in this new, harsh reality, the giants of the age, the Megafauna who ruled the continents for millions of years, find themselves walking into a trap from which there is no escape. The cosmic fireworks, whether they happened or not, signal the end of the age of monsters. We turn our gaze from the indifferent stars back to the struggling Earth, where a tragedy of biological proportions is about to play out, leaving us with only bones and questions. The silence of the aftermath is heavy, broken only by the wind whistling through the ribs of a world that is passing away. The silence of the post-impact world, whether born of cosmic fire or terrestrial ice, settles heavily over the northern hemisphere, and within this quiet, we witness the slow, majestic fading of an empire. It is not an empire of stone and steel, but of flesh, fur, and ivory. We find ourselves walking alongside a ghost, though she is still breathing, warm and monumentally alive. She is a woolly mammoth, the matriarch of her diminishing herd, a creature who carries the map of the continent in her memory. Standing nearly 11 feet tall at the shoulder, she is a mountain of russet-colored fur, her coat a thick, shaggy tapestry that has evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to defy the cold. But the cold of the Younger Dryas is different. It is not just the temperature that has turned against her, it is the land itself. For millennia, she and her ancestors roamed the mammoth steppe, a unique high-productivity ecosystem that stretched from Spain to Alaska, a cold, dry grassland that, despite the chill, was rich in protein-packed herbs, wildflowers, and sedges. It was an endless buffet that could support millions of giant grazers. But as the climate snaps back into this deep freeze, the moisture balance shifts. The nutritious golden grasses are dying out, replaced by boggy tundra, toxic birch shrubs, and mosses that offer little sustenance to a creature that needs to consume nearly 400 pounds of vegetation a day just to keep its metabolic furnace burning. We watch the matriarch pause, her massive curved tusks sweeping through the snow in a rhythmic, practiced motion designed to clear a patch for grazing. The snow is deeper now, harder crusted, and when she finally reaches the soil, she finds only wet moss and tough, woody stems. She chews, her giant molars grinding with a slow, rhythmic bass sound, but the food is filling without being nourishing. It is a slow starvation, a caloric deficit that builds day by day, invisible but relentless. Her breath plumes in the twilight air, huge clouds of steam that drift back over her shoulders, frosting the coarse guard hairs of her coat. Beside her, a calf leans against her leg, seeking warmth. The calf is small, fuzzy, and confused. He tries to nurse, but the matriarch's milk is thinning, her body prioritizing her own survival in a desperate biological calculus. There's a profound melancholy in her small, amber eyes. Mammoths are highly intelligent, social creatures, possessing an emotional depth that rivals our own. She remembers the summers of the Billing Alarud, the tall, sweet grasses, the warmth of the sun on her back, the ease of the migration. Now, the migration routes are blocked by expanding ice sheets or turned into impassable bogs. She is a refugee in her own home, wandering a landscape that is actively deleting the resources she needs to exist. This period marks the true twilight of the giants. It is here that the debate of overkill versus climate enters our story, a scholarly argument that has raged for decades. Did humans hunt these titans to extinction, or did the weather kill them? In the shadow of the Younger Dryas, the answer seems to lean heavily on the climate, or perhaps a fatal combination of both. The Blitzkrieg hypothesis suggests that humans, armed with Clovis points, slaughtered the naive Megafauna. But looking at the matriarch, we see that the environment has already struck the first fatal blow. She is weakened, her reproduction rate slowing, her habitat fragmenting into isolated islands of survivability. If a human hunter were to approach now, he would not be killing a thriving beast, but finishing off a survivor of a planetary siege. We see the herd moving slowly across a ridge, their silhouettes dark against the auroral sky. They move with a silence that belies their size, their padded feet designed to spread their weight, making them walk softly on the earth. They are the lords of this world, yet they are walking into history. There is a moment of stillness where the matriarch stops and trumpets, a sound that is not aggressive but searching. It is a low, infrasonic rumble that travels for miles through the ground, a call to other herds, to potential mates, to family members lost in the storm. But the answer is silence. The density of her species is dropping. The network of communication that once spanned the continent is breaking down. The loneliness of the extinction is palpable. It is not a bang, but a fading echo. We drift closer to her, seeing the intricate details of her existence, the way the snow clumps in the wool behind her ears, the ancient scars on her trunk from a wolf attack years ago, the gentle, tactile way she uses her trunk to reassure the calf. She is not a monster. She is a mother, fighting a battle against thermodynamics that she cannot win. In the permafrost of Siberia and the Yukon, the earth is preparing to preserve these final moments. We know of a blue babe and the Berezovka mammoth, creatures frozen so quickly and completely that buttercups were found still fresh in their stomachs. This tells us of the suddenness of the end for some, a misstep into a hidden crevasse, a mudslide, or a sudden storm, trapping them in a frozen time capsule. Our matriarch avoids the crevasse, but she cannot avoid the changing epoch. She walks on, a titan of the Pleistocene, carrying the weight of an era that is ending. The tragedy is not just the loss of the animal, but the loss of the ecosystem they maintained. Their trampling feet tilled the soil, their grazing kept the forests at bay. As they fade, the landscape changes further, the moss growing thicker, the silence deepening. As the herd disappears into the swirling snow, fading like ink in water, we are left with a sense of profound loss, but also of peace. They are returning to the earth, their bodies destined to become part of the frozen soil, their ivory tusks left to spiral out of the ground like strange white roots for future generations to wonder at. The wind erases their footprints almost as soon as they are made. The age of the megafauna is closing, the curtain falling on the greatest show on earth. But where the giants fall, a vacuum is created. The world does not stop. It merely reorganizes. The shadows that stalk the edges of the herd are watching, waiting. The predators, who relied on these mountains of meat, now face their own crisis. The intricate web of life is unraveling, and as the mammoths fade into the white mist of the Younger Dryas, the hunger shifts to those with sharp teeth and golden eyes, who find their kingdom suddenly empty and their own survival hanging by a thread in the freezing dark. The darkness that swallows the mammoth herd is not empty. It is alive with eyes that glow gold and green in the reflected light of the aurora, eyes that have known for thousands of years exactly where to strike a throat to silence a heartbeat. We shift our focus now from the majestic victims to the desperate executioners, the apex predators who are finding their thrones crumbling beneath them. We hover low over the scrubland of what will become California, where the air is thick with the scent of tar and sagebrush. Here, crouching in the shadow of a boulder, is the Smilodon fatalis, the saber-toothed cat. He is not the lithe, striped tiger of modern jungles, but a creature built like a bear, a compact powerhouse of muscle designed for wrestling giants. His coat is likely tawny, perhaps spotted like a bobcat to blend into the dappled shadows of the fading forests. but it is his mouth that commands our attention. Those twin daggers of canine teeth, 7 inches of serrated enamel that protrude past his lower jaw even when his mouth is closed. For eons, these weapons were the keys to the kingdom, perfect for slicing through the soft, thick arteries of sloths and juvenile mammoths. But tonight, the Smilodon is motionless, and his ribs are showing through his winter coat. The world has changed faster than his evolution can keep up. The slow, lumbering giants he was built to hunt are disappearing, retreating into the ice or dying in the mud, and in their place are swift, skittish herds of modern deer and elk, animals that are too fast for his ambush tactics and too small to justify the immense energy cost of the kill. We watch him test the wind, his ears twitching. He is a tragic figure, a masterpiece of biological engineering that has suddenly become obsolete. He's a specialist in a world that now demands generalists. The extinction trap is closing around him. His very adaptations, those magnificent teeth, are now a liability. They are fragile, liable to snap if they hit bone, meaning he cannot scavenge effectively like a hyena. He must kill fresh, soft meat, and there is simply not enough of it left. There is a deep, resonant sadness in seeing a creature that is the absolute pinnacle of its lineage facing a void it cannot bite its way out of. He rises, shaking the frost from his back, and moves with a heavy, fluid grace, a king wandering a palace that has been looted. He's not a monster. He's a biological machine running out of fuel. A few miles away, in a valley choked with fog, we hear the sound that defines the Pleistocene night, the chilling, harmonious howl of the dire wolf, Younger Dryas. It is a sound deeper and more mournful than the timber wolves of today, resonating from chests that are broader and heavier. We drift down to see the pack, a roving family of 20 strong, tearing at the carcass of a horse that succumbed to the cold. The dire wolf is not merely a larger version of the gray wolf, it is a different beast entirely, heavier boned, with jaws capable of crushing femurs to get at the marrow, a necessary adaptation for hard times. But even for them, the Younger Dryas is a brutal filter. The pack is tense, they snap at each other, the hierarchy brittle with hunger. We notice that many of them have broken teeth, a telltale sign found in thousands of fossils from this era, indicating that they are gnawing on bone in desperation, eating parts of the kill they would usually discard. The competition is fierce. It is not just the elements they fight, but the arrival of a new, cunning rival. We see the pack leader pause, his hackles rising as he scents something on the wind, wood smoke and cured leather. Humans. The relationship between the dire wolf and humanity is not the one of companionship that will form with the gray wolf. The dire wolf is too large, too set in its ways, a relic of the Megafauna era that cannot shrink itself to fit by the human fire. They are competitors, not friends. The humans steal their kills. The humans hunt their prey. We witness a silent standoff across the valley floor. The wolf pack on one side, a band of Clovis hunters on the other, both groups hungry, both armed, staring each other down across the carcass of the world. The wolves retreat, slipping back into the dark, ceding the ground. It is a surrender that signals the changing of the guard. There is a grim irony waiting for these predators in the asphalt seeps of Rancho La Brea, near modern-day Los Angeles. In their desperation, many are drawn to the distress calls of trapped animals stuck in the bubbling tar, thinking they have found an easy meal. We see a young, inexperienced saber-tooth creeping toward a bison that is thrashing in the black, sticky ooze. He leaps, thinking only of the meat, but the tar catches him, gripping his paws with the strength of the earth itself. The predator becomes the prey of the geology. As he struggles, his cries attract the wolves, who also become ensnared. It is a chaotic, slow-motion tragedy that creates a mass grave, a predator trap that will preserve their bones for thousands of years, a dark, sticky museum of the starving. This concentration of fossils tells us that the populations were stressed, reckless with hunger, taking risks they would never take in a time of plenty. As we pull back from this dark scene, leaving the trapped and the starving to their fate, we feel the weight of the silence they leave behind. The disappearance of these apex predators changes the landscape as much as the loss of the mammoths. Without the fear of the saber-toothed, the surviving prey behave differently. The vegetation changes, the very rhythm of the wilderness alters. The landscape of fear evaporates. The dire wolves will fade, leaving their smaller, more adaptable cousins, the gray wolves, to inherit the doghood of the future. The saber-tooths will vanish entirely, leaving no descendants, just a legend of a cat with knives for teeth that stalks the nightmares of our genetic memory. The wind howls through the canyons, sounding strangely empty without the answering call of the dire pack. The night seems less dangerous, yet more lonely. We are witnessing the end of the wild in its most primal, monstrous form. The monsters are dying, leaving the world to the smaller, the quicker, and the tool users. As the last saber-tooth in the valley lays his head down on his paws, closing his golden eyes against the driving snow, waiting for a sleep that will become extinction, we realize that nature is not cruel, merely indifferent. It selects for the future, and in the freezing crucible of the Younger Dryas, the future belongs to those who can change. The great cats and wolves were perfect for a world that no longer exists, and perfection, it turns out, is a fatal flaw when the rules of the game are rewritten overnight. We leave them in the dignity of the dark, their growls fading into the wind, and turn our gaze to those who are watching from the caves, the two-legged survivors who are about to face their own crisis of adaptation, forced to reinvent their entire way of life as the pillars of their existence crumble into the snow. We withdraw our gaze from the dying eyes of the predators and turn it toward the hands of the survivors, specifically to a pair of weathered, calloused hands holding a stone that glitters like captured moonlight in the flickering firelight. We are in the heart of a Clovis camp, somewhere on the high plains of what is now New Mexico, roughly 12,800 years ago. The object in the hands is a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering, a bifacial projectile point, fluted at the base with a singular masterful strike that removed a channel of stone, allowing it to be hafted securely onto a spear shaft. This is the Clovis point, the iPhone of the Pleistocene, a technology so successful, so distinct, and so effective that it spread across the entirety of North America in a geological heartbeat. For centuries, this stone tip was the ultimate answer to the question of survival, the key that unlocked the tremendous calorie reserves of the mammoth and the mastodon. But tonight, the man holding it turns it over and over in his fingers with a furrowed brow, a silent worry etched into his face that mirrors the fracturing landscape outside. The tool is perfect, but the world for which it was designed has vanished. The atmosphere in the camp is heavy, woven with a tension that is less about immediate danger and more about a creeping existential obsolescence. The elders sit wrapped in furs that are becoming threadbare, telling stories of the great hunt, of days when the earth shook under the hooves of 10,000 beasts, when a single kill could feed the clan for a month. The children listen, their eyes wide, but they listen as if to a fairy tale. They have never seen a herd of that size. They have only known the howling wind, the biting frost, and the scarcity of the big cold. The disconnect between the cultural memory and the physical reality is widening. The Clovis culture, defined by its specialization in big game hunting, is facing a crisis of identity. When you build an entire society around the pursuit of monsters, what do you become when the monsters leave? We watch the craftsman strike the flint again, the sharp clack echoing in the cold air. He is trying to make the point smaller, lighter, attempting to adapt the old technology to the new reality, but the stone is stubborn and the old habits are deep. This moment captures the central mystery of the Clovis disappearance. In the archaeological record, the Clovis point vanishes abruptly. For a long time, this led to wild theories that the people were wiped out by the comet or a plague, or that they simply died off from the cold. But floating here in the intimate space of the tent, we see the truth is likely more subtle and more human. They are not vanishing, they are dissolving. The tight-knit unity of the Clovis people, maintained by the shared ritual of the mammoth hunt and the exchange of the distinctive stone points across vast trade networks, is breaking down. As the resources dwindle, the bands become smaller, more isolated, territorial. The grand continental culture is fragmenting into local tribes, each fighting for their own patch of survival. Outside, the wind whips across the plains, carrying a dusting of the black mat soil we saw earlier, the dark carbon-rich layer that physically separates the age of Clovis from what comes next. It is a line in the sand drawn by the planet. We see a hunting party return, their heads low, their spears heavy with failure. They have tracked a herd of elk for 3 days, but the deep snow and the animals' speed made the heavy Clovis spears clumsy and ineffective. They needed a weapon for speed, not power, but they are still carrying the artillery of a siege. The hunger in the camp is a physical presence, a sharp pain in the belly that keeps sleep at bay. We feel the anxiety of the mothers who look at their infants and wonder if the milk will last the winter. There is a quiet desperation here that drives innovation, but innovation is painful. It requires admitting that the ancestors, for all their wisdom, were wrong about the future. Historians and archaeologists still argue furiously about this transition. Was it a collapse or a reorganization? Did the population crash, or did they just stop making the points that allowed us to identify them? The overkill hypothesis suggests they hunted themselves out of a lifestyle, becoming victims of their own success. But watching the care with which they mend their clothes and share the meager scraps of meat, we see that they are not mindless destroyers. They are people caught in a trap of shifting baselines. They revered the animals they killed, perhaps even loved them in the complex, bloody way of the hunter, and the absence of the mammoth is felt as a spiritual loss as much as a nutritional one. The mammoth was their calendar, their map, their provider. Without it, the world feels broken. We see a young woman, perhaps a shaman or a healer, sitting apart from the group, staring into the embers. She is fingering a necklace of ivory beads, heirlooms from a grandmother she barely remembers. She senses that the time of the ivory is over. She looks at the stoneworkers, watching them struggle to nap the large bifaces from dwindling supplies of high-quality chert. The trade routes that brought beautiful glassy stone from hundreds of miles away have been severed by the ice and the hostility of neighboring groups. They must use what is at hand: poor quality local stone, river cobbles, obsidian. The majestic aesthetic of the Clovis Point is becoming a luxury they can no longer afford. The form must follow the function, and the function has changed. This is the Clovis end, not a cinematic extinction event where everyone falls down dead, but a slow, heartbreaking realization that the old songs no longer conjure the herds. It is the end of a dream. We watch as the craftsman finally sets down the half-finished Clovis point, leaving it on the ground, a reject, a failure. He picks up a smaller flake, a piece of debris that he would have swept away a generation ago. He looks at it, turning it in the light, imagining a different shape, something sharper, smaller, something that can fly true and fast. In this hesitation, in this switch from the heavy master weapon to the scrappy improvisation, we witness the death of an epic and the birth of a new resilience. The Clovis people are not dying. They are taking off a mask that no longer fits. They are shedding the skin of the mammoth hunter to reveal something leaner and harder underneath. The fire burns low, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls of the shelter. The wind outside seems to be erasing their footprints even as they make them, urging them to move, to change, to forget. We leave the Clovis point there in the dirt, where it will lie for 12,000 years until a rancher or a student uncovers it and wonders at the hands that made it. It remains a testament to a time when humans were the masters of giants, a frozen memory of a glory that could not survive the cold. But the hands that made it are already moving on, reaching for new tools, preparing to step into the next chapter of the story where survival will demand a completely different kind of genius. From the ashes of the Clovis world, something new and sharper emerges, born not of abundance, but of the hard, grinding necessity of the Younger Dryas. We fast forward just a few centuries, though the cold remains a constant biting companion. We are now standing on the edge of a deep, sun-baked arroyo in what is today northeastern New Mexico, near a place that will one day be famous as the Folsom Site. The silence of the plains is about to be shattered. Below us, the earth begins to tremble, a rhythmic vibration that grows into a roar, sounding like a thunderstorm trapped in the dirt. A cloud of red dust rises against the pale blue sky, and through it we see them, a massive herd of bison antiquus. These are not the bison of the modern American West. They are their larger, more aggressive ancestors, towering nearly 7 feet at the shoulder with horns that span a terrifying yard across. They are survivors, beasts that have weathered the extinction filter that claimed the mammoth, and they are moving with the frantic rolling energy of a stampede. But they are not running from a predator with claws. They are running from a predator with a plan. Running alongside the herd, screaming and waving hides to funnel the beasts into the narrow canyon, are the people of the Folsom culture. They move with a fluidity and coordination that the old mammoth hunters never needed. This is not a duel between man and monster. It is a tactical military operation. We focus on a hunter crouching behind a sagebrush on the canyon rim. In his hand is the weapon that defines this new age, the atlatl, or spear thrower. It is a simple stick with a hook at the end, but it acts as a lever, effectively extending the length of his arm and doubling the velocity of his throw. Loaded into it is a dart tipped with the Folsom point. If the Clovis point was a broadsword, the Folsom point is a scalpel. It is smaller, thinner, and exquisitely crafted, with a distinct flute or channel running almost the entire length of the blade. Archaeologists to this day marvel at the daring required to make them. The final strike to create that flute requires such precise force that nearly half of the points break during production. It is a high-risk, high-reward technology, a symbol of a people who have no room for error. The hunter waits, his breathing controlled, his eyes locked on a large bull thundering toward the trap. The signal is given. A sharp whistle that cuts through the din. The hunters rise as one. The air fills with the thwip, thwip, thwip of darts launching from atlatls. The physics are brutal and effective. The Folsom points, sharp enough to shave with, pierce the thick hide of the bison, the fluting allowing the blood to flow freely, weakening the animal quickly. It is a scene of chaotic violence, but also of supreme human ingenuity. The bison, confused and corralled, stumble in the narrow ravine. The dust chokes the air, mixing with the metallic scent of blood and the musk of fear. We see the cooperation involved. There is no single hero here. Men and women work together, some driving the herd, others throwing, others waiting with lances to finish the work. It is a community ensuring its survival for the next 6 months in a single adrenaline-fueled afternoon. Later, as the sun sets and the adrenaline fades, the camp is a hive of activity. Nothing is wasted. The bison offers everything: meat for the belly, hide for the tent, sinew for the bowstring, bone for the needle, and dung for the fire. We watch a young man carefully extracting a point from the rib cage of a fallen bull. He examines the stone, noting a small chip in the edge. He smiles, a small tired expression of relief. This specific moment, a stone point lodged between animal ribs, will one day be the smoking gun that proves to modern science that humans walked the Americas during the Ice Age. When a cowboy and former slave named George McJunkin discovers a similar scene in the 1900s, it will shatter the scientific dogma that humans had only been in the New World for a few thousand years. But for our hunter, there is no history, only dinner. He cleans the point, honoring the stone that saved him. The Folsom people represent a profound psychological shift. They have accepted that the good old days of the mammoth are gone. They have stopped mourning the past and started mastering the present. They are nomadic, moving fast to follow the herds, leaving behind little but their kill sites and their magnificent stone points. Their lives are harder, leaner, and faster. We see it in their campsites: fewer ornaments, fewer heavy grinding stones, everything designed to be carried on a back. They are the ultralight backpackers of the Pleistocene. Yet, in this austerity, there is art. The Folsom point is not just a weapon. In its symmetry and difficulty of manufacture, it is an object of beauty, a flex of craftsmanship that says, "We are still here, and we are skilled." There is a moment of quiet humor by the fire. A group of hunters is reenacting the hunt, teasing one of their number who tripped and fell into a patch of prickly pear cactus during the chase. He is pulling thorns from his leg, grumbling, while his friends laugh, their faces smeared with grease and soot. It is a warm, human moment that bridges the millennia. It reminds us that amidst the ice ages and the extinctions, people still laughed at their friends' clumsiness. The laughter is a survival mechanism too, a way to bond, to release the stress of a life lived constantly on the razor's edge of starvation. The fulsome adaptation is the ultimate proof of human resilience. When the climate turned against them, when the food source vanished, they didn't lay down and die. They miniaturized their tech, organized their society, and targeted a new energy source. They became bison specialists, locking themselves into a dance with these herds that would last until the arrival of the horse and the gun. As we drift away from the camp, listening to the soft murmur of voices and the crackle of the fire fueled by bison chips, we see the sparks rising into the cold, clear night. The Folsom people have solved the riddle of the Younger Dryas in North America. They have found a way to endure. But across the ocean, in the lands of the Near East, the pressure of the cold is forcing a different group of humans toward a solution that is even more radical, a solution that will not just change how they live, but will change the face of the planet forever. The bison hunters mastered the wild. The people we are about to meet will attempt to tame it. We leave the bison-dusted plains of North America and let the rotation of the earth carry us eastward, chasing the sunrise across the Atlantic over the shivering ice-scabbed face of Europe until we descend into the warmer golden light of the Levant. We find ourselves in the hills of what is today Israel and Jordan, a region that history will one day christen the Fertile Crescent. But in the throes of the Younger Dryas, fertile is a cruel misnomer. The landscape here is parched. The lush open woodlands of oak and pistachio that thrive during the warm years are retreating, gasping for water, replaced by the encroaching steppe. The air is dry and dusty, carrying the scent of withered sage and baking stone. Here, nestled against a limestone terrace overlooking a shrinking lake, lies a village of the Natufian people. This settlement, Ain Malaha, is a marvel of its time. A collection of 50 or so round, semi-subterranean stone houses with roofs of thatched reed. These people are unique in the human story. They are sedentary, living in permanent homes, yet they are not farmers. For generations, they lived in a paradise where they didn't need to sow seeds because the wild grasses grew in such abundance that a family could gather a year's supply of grain in a few weeks. They were the wealthy heirs of the boiling Alarud warmth, the first people to stop wandering. But the party is over. The big freeze of the north has manifested here as the big drought. We enter one of the roundhouses, stepping down into the cool sunken floor. The air inside is thick with the smell of smoke and unwashed bodies. A woman kneels before a massive basalt mortar, a heavy stone bowl embedded into the earth floor. She is grinding wild einkorn wheat, her upper body rocking back and forth in a rhythm that defines her existence. We can hear the grind-crush grind of the pestle, a sound that will echo through the next 10,000 years of human civilization. But today, the rhythm is anxious. The wild fields are failing. The stands of wild grain are thinning out, retreating to higher altitudes where the rainfall is slightly more reliable. The gazelle herds, once so thick they darken the valley floor, are scattered and skittish. The Natufians are facing a resource depression, a polite academic term for the terrifying realization that the pantry is empty. We watch the woman pause, wiping sweat and flour from her brow. She runs her tongue over her teeth. They are worn flat, the enamel ground away by the grit of the stone and the sand that ends up in the flour. There is a grim biological trade-off happening here. In choosing to eat these hard grass seeds, the Natufians are ruining their bodies even as they save them. But they have no choice. The easy calories are gone. This pressure cooker of the Younger Dryas is about to squeeze out the most significant invention in human history, not through genius, but through desperation. Historians and archaeologists call this the broad-spectrum revolution. The idea that as the best food disappeared, humans were forced to widen their diet to include second-rate foods like small game, waterfowl, and labor-intensive grains. It wasn't a choice. It was a demotion. Outside the hut, an elder walks the perimeter of the village. He looks at the middens, the trash piles where discarded seeds from previous years have sprouted in the nitrogen-rich soil. He notices that these accidental plants are doing better than the ones out in the wild, protected as they are from gazelles and watered by the village waste. He kneels, his joints popping, arthritis is common here, and touches the head of a stalk of barley. It is non-shattering, a genetic mutant that holds onto its seeds longer than the wild variety, making it easier to harvest. In the wild, this mutation is a failure. In the village, it is a miracle. He makes a decision, one that feels small but carries the weight of a planet. He clears a patch of ground near the house, using a digging stick weighted with a perforated stone, and deliberately plants the seeds he gathered. He is not trying to invent agriculture. He's trying to save his grandchildren from starving next winter. He's building a buffer against the chaotic climate. This act is the trap snapping shut. Once you start planting, you have to stay to protect the crop. You have to weed, you have to water, you have to defend. The population grows because you have more calories, but the individual health declines because the diet is monotonous. It is the great paradox of the Neolithic Revolution. We gained civilization, but we lost our free time and our teeth. We see a young man nearby repairing a sickle. The handle is made of bone, carved in the shape of a gazelle's head, a beautiful tribute to the animal they are seeing less of, and the blade is made of jagged flint microliths glued in with bitumen. This tool is a harvester of souls, the reaper of the grass that now rules their lives. He tests the edge against his thumb. It is sharp, ready for the harvest that is now a mandatory sentence of hard labor. There is a moment of levity, however, in the communal area where a flat stone rests over a fire. A group is attempting to bake a paste of water and ground grain. One of them gets distracted by a story, and the bread burns, turning into a blackened disk of carbon. His friend laughs, tossing the burnt puck at him, calling him the master of charcoal. It is the first bad cooking joke in history. They scrape off the burnt part and eat the rest. It is dense, gritty, and tastes of smoke, but it is warm, and it sits heavy in the stomach, chasing away the hunger pangs. There is also a scholarly debate lingering in the smoke of this fire. Did they start farming for bread or for beer? Some evidence suggests that the fermentation of grain for alcohol might have been the primary driver, a way to create social cohesion and celebrate rituals. Perhaps the Younger Dryas drove them to drink, and farming was just the way to keep the tap flowing. Looking at their tired faces, one could hardly blame them. The sun sets over the drying lake, casting long shadows across the village. The Natufians do not know that they are ending the Paleolithic era. They do not know that the seeds they plant today will grow into the empires of Sumer and Babylon. They only know that the world has turned against them, and they are fighting back with the only weapons they have left, a digging stick and a handful of grain. They are trading the freedom of the wanderer for the security of the silo. The Younger Dryas has forced their hand, locking humanity into a contract with the soil that we have never been able to break. As the first stars appear, the same stars the Clovis hunters are watching, thousands of miles away, the village quiets down. The grinding stops, but the change has begun. The wild world is being tamed, one seed at a time. But while the northern hemisphere is locked in this struggle of ice and drought, the southern hemisphere is dancing to a completely different rhythm, a reminder that the earth is a place of contradictions, where one man's freeze is another man's flood. We leave the smoke of the Natufian fires and drift south, crossing the equator, to see what the flip side of the coin looks like. We drift southward, crossing the invisible line of the equator, leaving the shivering, desperate lands of the northern hemisphere behind. As we glide over the vast expanse of the Amazon basin and down toward the rugged spine of the Andes, we notice a strange and disorienting shift in the narrative of the earth. If the north is locked in a freezer, the south has been placed in a gentle oven. This is the bipolar seesaw, a planetary balancing act that proves the Earth's climate system is a closed loop of energy. The heat that was rejected by the stalled currents in the North Atlantic did not simply vanish. It had to go somewhere. Trapped by the oceanic blockade, it pooled in the southern hemisphere, creating a mirror image world where the Younger Dryas is not a time of freezing, but of warming. We descend upon the windswept steppes of Patagonia, near the very tip of South America. Here, the landscape is dramatic, a jagged chaos of granite peaks and deep fjords, but the air carries a surprising softness. We are standing outside the entrance of a place known today as the Milodon Cave, a massive natural cathedral of rock. Inside, the darkness is thick and smells of dry dung and ancient fur. We hear a heavy shuffling sound, like a boulder being dragged across sand. A Mylodon, the giant ground sloth, lumbers into the shaft of light near the cave mouth. It is a creature of absurd proportions, standing 10 feet tall on its hind legs, with shaggy reddish hair and skin embedded with tiny osteoderms, bone armor, that makes it nearly impervious to spears. Unlike the starving mammoths of the north, this sloth is content. The warming climate here has encouraged the growth of grasses and shrubs. The glaciers of the southern Andes are not advancing, they are retreating, pulling back to reveal green valleys that haven't seen the sun in thousands of years. We watch a group of humans, the Paleo-Indians of the southern cone, moving through the valley below. They are the distant descendants of those who crossed the Bering Land Bridge, but their reality is inverted. Their ancestors walked south to escape the cold. These people are walking south and finding warmth. They wear lighter skins, guanaco hides draped loosely over their shoulders. We see them stopping to harvest berries that are ripening early in the season. There is a sense of abundance here that is absent in the grim tableau of Europe and North America. The children are playing in a stream that is swollen with meltwater, not from a catastrophic flood, but from the steady rhythmic pulse of a thawing continent. However, this warming is not without its own chaos. We travel further south, toward the icy silence of Antarctica. Here, the ice cores tell a story of rising temperatures, a deglaciation that is out of sync with the north. The great ice shelves are groaning, cracking under the thermal stress. We witness a massive calving event on the edge of the Weddell Sea, a block of ice the size of a small country breaking free with a roar that rivals the Laker Sea eruption. It crashes into the ocean, sending a tsunami radiating outward. This is the hidden danger of the seesaw. As the South warms, it begins to release its own horde of fresh water into the oceans. The sea level is slowly creeping up, a silent, relentless tide that threatens the coastal camps of the humans living along the Chilean coast. Back in the cave, the humans have returned. They are wary of the sloth. It is a herbivore, but a 10-foot sloth with claws like meat hooks is best left alone. They settle near the entrance, lighting a fire. One of the hunters, a woman with wind-chapped skin, looks at the moon. She notices the winds are changing, becoming fiercer. The warming south creates a stronger temperature gradient with the still frozen Antarctic interior, driving the roaring 40s winds to new velocities. The wind screams over the cave mouth, a constant high-pitched keening that makes conversation difficult. It is a reminder that global warming, in a local sense, brings energy, and energy brings storms. There is a fascinating, if slightly humorous, debate among archaeologists regarding the coexistence of humans and the giant sloths in this region. Did they hunt them? Did they keep them as pets in the caves? Some Victorian-era scientists even believed the sloths might still be alive, hiding in the unexplored fjords. Looking at the scene, the relationship seems to be one of respectful avoidance. The humans are happy to scavenge a dead sloth for its thick armored hide, which makes for an excellent roof, but tackling a live one is a fool's errand when there are plenty of guanacos, wild llamas, to hunt. This southern warmth creates a refuge for life, a lifeboat for biodiversity while the north struggles. The forests of Valdivia are lush, dripping with rain, a temperate rainforest that stands in stark contrast to the dry tundra of Europe. We see hummingbirds darting through fuchsia flowers, flashes of iridescent green and purple against the dark leaves. It is a vibrant, breathing ecosystem that seems to be mocking the suffering of the northern hemisphere. But the Earth seeks equilibrium. The heat cannot stay trapped in the south forever. The system is straining against the dam. The freshwater lid in the North Atlantic is thinning, the salt is accumulating, and the density of the water is increasing. The seesaw is about to tip back. The humans in the cave, finishing their meal of roasted guanaco, feel a sudden drop in the wind, a stillness that feels pregnant with change. They do not know it, but the great heat engine of the ocean is priming itself for a restart. The warmth they have enjoyed is borrowed time, a thermal loan that the planet is about to call in. As they sleep, wrapped in the warmth of the southern anomaly, the gears of the world are beginning to grind toward the final act of this glacial drama. The Younger Dryas is ending, and the transition will be just as sudden, just as violent, and just as transformative as its beginning. We prepare to leave the comfort of the southern summer and rocket back to the north, where the ice is waiting for its final command to retreat. We release our hold on the southern winds and rocket back across the equator, returning to the frozen theater of the north, where the final act of this climatic drama is about to begin. The year is approximately 11,550 years ago. For over a millennium, the northern hemisphere has been locked in a glacial stare-down, a winter that spanned 40 generations. But the atmosphere is a chaotic system, a coiled spring of pressure and temperature gradients that can only hold its tension for so long. We hover above the North Atlantic once more, where the sea ice has formed a rigid white ceiling as far south as France. The silence is absolute, a frozen paralysis that seems eternal. But then, deep in the abyss of the ocean, a threshold is crossed. The freshwater cap that had strangled the currents for so long has slowly thinned, mixed away by the patient churning of the tides and the wind. The salinity of the surface water inches up just a fraction until it reaches a critical tipping point. Physics takes over with a snap. The heavy, salty water, no longer buoyant, suddenly plunges downward, sinking into the depths. This vertical drop acts like the starter motor of a colossal engine. The Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, the great heartbeat of the world, kickstarts with a roar of fluid dynamics. The effect is instantaneous and violent. The warm tropical waters which had been piling up in the south are suddenly unleashed, racing northward like a dam breaking. They undercut the sea ice, eating it from below. We watch as the vast white sheets fracture, not into clean lines, but into a chaotic mosaic of shattering crystal. The air temperature shoots upward. This is not the slow, centuries-long warming we speak of in modern climate debates. This is a thermal explosion. Analysis of the ice cores from Greenland, those faithful diaries of the sky, shows that the temperature rose by as much as 10 degrees Celsius in a single decade. Imagine the shock of it. A child born in a world of perpetual snow could, by the time they reached adulthood, be walking through meadows of tall grass and sweating in the sun. It is the climatic equivalent of walking out of a deep freezer directly into a sauna. On the land, the reaction is chaotic. The Great Thaw begins. The glaciers, which had been creeping forward or standing still, suddenly find themselves out of equilibrium. They do not retreat gracefully. They collapse. We are standing at the foot of a massive ice sheet in Scandinavia. The sound is deafening, a constant rolling thunder of calving ice and rushing water. Rivers of meltwater, dark with sediment and churning with ice blocks the size of houses, burst from the base of the glaciers, carving deep canyons into the landscape in a matter of days. This is the unleashing of Meltwater Pulse 1b, a surge of water that raises global sea levels by nearly 30 feet in a geological instant. The coastlines are redrawn. The land bridge connecting Britain to Europe, known as Doggerland, begins to weep as the marshes turn to mudflats, and the mudflats turn to sea. The hunters who lived in these lowlands find their camps flooding, their familiar paths swallowed by the rising gray tide. The atmosphere itself undergoes a reorganization. The jet stream, which had been buckled south, snaps back to the north, dragging the storm tracks with it. The dry, dusty winds of the Younger Dryas are replaced by warm, moisture-laden breezes from the Atlantic. the rains return. We watch the arid steppes of Europe, where the Dryas flowers had reigned supreme, get hammered by warm torrential downpours. The soil, frozen hard as iron for centuries, turns to mud, a deep, impassable slurry that swallows the bones of the starved mammoths. The Dryas flowers, those hardy heralds of the cold, are drowned or cooked. They retreat, fleeing back up the mountainsides to the alpine refuges where they survive to this day, waiting for the ice to return. In their place, the seeds of birch and pine, lying dormant in the soil or carried by the wind, explode into life. The green wave sweeps north, reclaiming the continent with a speed that is almost aggressive. For the humans witnessing this, the psychological impact must have been bewildering. The gods of the cold have been defeated by the gods of the sun, but the victory is messy. We see a group of foragers in the Rhine Valley, standing on a hillside, watching the river below swell to terrifying proportions. It is a flood of biblical scale, sweeping away trees, boulders, and entire landscapes. They are soaked to the bone, not by freezing sleet, but by warm rain. They cast off their heavy fur parkas, the heavy hides feeling suffocating in the new humid air. There is a sense of liberation, but also of disorientation. The world they knew, the world of predictability and hard frozen earth, is melting into a chaotic soup of life and water. It is a time of mud. So much mud. If you have ever complained about a muddy festival field, spare a thought for the Mesolithic human, whose entire world became a bog for a century. Historians and geologists debate the precise mechanics of this end. Did the warming happen in steps, or was it a single clean break? The ice cores suggest a flickering switch, a few years of volatile swings between hot and cold before the warmth finally latched on. It was as if the climate system was sputtering, coughing out the last of the cold before finding its new, stable rhythm. This volatility would have been terrifying, a seasons of chaos where a summer of blistering heat could be followed by a winter of sudden return frost, killing the new saplings, but eventually the warmth held. The Holocene epoch, the entirely recent era in which human civilization has flourished, had truly begun. In the Near East, the Natufians, who had been grinding their teeth on hard grains in the drought, suddenly find the heavens opening. The rains return to the Fertile Crescent. The wild cereals expand their range, growing thick and tall. But the genie is out of the bottle. The Natufians do not simply go back to foraging. They have invested too much in their stone houses and their granaries. Instead, the return of abundance supercharges their experiments. The farming that began as a desperate hedge against starvation now becomes a tool for surplus. The warmth allows them to plant more, to feed more, to build more. The trap of agriculture set during the cold is sprung by the warmth. As we drift over the rapidly greening landscape, we see the steam rising from the earth, a mist that smells of wet soil, pine resin, and decay. It is the smell of a planet waking up with a hangover, shaking off the ice and getting back to the business of biology. The silence of the Younger Dryas is replaced by the roar of water and the buzz of insects. The mosquitoes return in clouds that darken the sky, perhaps the only downside to the end of the Ice Age, and surely proof that nature loves a balance of joy and annoyance. The ice sheets retreat to the poles, curling up like sleeping dogs, leaving behind a scarred, reshaped world, ready for the footprints of a new kind of human. The long winter is over. The garden is open, and the tides are rising to meet the new shore. The world is now awake, and it is thirsty for change. We glide over a planet in the throes of a radical makeover, watching as the Holocene epoch asserts its dominance with the slow, unstoppable power of rising water. The great melt we witnessed in the previous moments has consequences that ripple out across the globe, fundamentally redrawing the map of human existence. We find ourselves hovering over what is now the North Sea, but looking down, we do not see open ocean. Not yet. We see Doggerland, the Atlantis of the Stone Age. Oh, it is a vast, low-lying marshland connecting Britain to mainland Europe, a rich, verdant delta teeming with life. But the water is coming. The sea level is rising not by inches, but by feet, a relentless transgression that swallows beaches, inundates estuaries, and turns hunting grounds into salt marshes. We watch a family of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, the Maglemosian people, dismantling their summer camp. They are people of the wetlands, skilled with canoes dug out of single pine logs, their lives defined by the rhythm of the water. But this year, the high tide didn't recede. The salt water has poisoned the roots of the oak trees at the water's edge, leaving them standing as bleached skeletal warnings. There is a quiet tragedy in this slow-motion drowning. This is not a Hollywood tidal wave. It is a generational squeeze. The elders point to a distant sandbank, now submerged, and say, "I used to walk there to hunt red deer." The younger generation listens, but they build their platforms higher, weaving reed mats to create dry floors over the mud. They are the first climate refugees of the modern era, pushed steadily inward, compressing populations into smaller territories. The loss of Doggerland is arguably the most significant geographic event in European prehistory, a severance that turned Britain into an island and isolated its people for thousands of years. We see a final crossing, a group of traders carrying flint cores, wading through chest-deep water across a land bridge that is dissolving under their feet. They look back at the mainland, not knowing they will be the last to make the journey on foot. The channel widens, the currents strengthen, and the physical link is broken, leaving culture to drift apart on the tides. On the mainland, the transformation is just as profound, but it is a conquest of green. The Great Reforestation is underway. The tundra, that open, wind-swept highway of the mammoth, is being devoured by the forest. We watch in time-lapse as the pioneer species, the birch and the hazel, rush north, followed closely by the heavy infantry of the oaks, elms, and limes. The open vistas disappear, replaced by a dense closed canopy woodland that stretches from the Pyrenees to the Urals. For the humans, this is a claustrophobic shift. The great herds of reindeer and horses, which relied on the open plains, move north or vanish. In their place come the solitary, elusive animals of the forest, the red deer, the roe deer, the wild boar. Hunting changes from a long-range line-of-sight game to a close-quarters ambush in the dappled shade. The bow and arrow becomes the supreme weapon, a tool for silence and precision in the thicket. We see a hunter crouching in the undergrowth, his body painted with mud and ash to break up his outline. He is motionless, listening to the crack of a twig. The forest is loud, birds calling, leaves rustling, a sensory overload compared to the silent white noise of the Ice Age. He's not just a killer, he's a manager of the forest. We see him later, using fire to clear a small clearing, creating a glade that will attract deer to the fresh grass. This is the beginning of niche construction, the subtle gardening of the wild. Humans are no longer just surviving the landscape, they are shaping it to their needs, even before they technically become farmers. There is a scholarly debate here about the climax forest myth, the idea that Europe became a squirrel's paradise where one could travel from sea to sea without touching the ground. Modern research suggests the forest was more of a mosaic, kept open by the grazing of large herbivores like the aurochs, the massive ill-tempered wild ancestors of cows, and the activity of beavers. We drift over a river valley where a beaver colony has engineered a massive wetland complex. The dams slow the water, trapping silt, creating fertile pockets of life. The humans trap the beavers for their warm, waterproof fur, but they also respect the engineers, often setting their fish traps in the calm waters the beavers create. It is a symbiosis of the swamp. As the coastline stabilizes, roughly near where it is today, human settlements become more permanent. The shell middens begin to rise along the shores of Denmark and Portugal. These are massive heaps of discarded oyster and cockle shells, the trash piles of thousands of years of seafood feasts. We sit with a group of people on top of one of these middens, shucking oysters with bone tools. The mood is relaxed. The frantic starvation of the Younger Dryas is a distant memory, a nightmare told in the winter. Now the sea provides. They are well fed, healthy, and their society is becoming complex. we see elaborate burials, bodies sprinkled with red ochre and adorned with deer teeth, suggesting a belief in an afterlife, or at least a deep respect for the journey beyond. The abundance of the Holocene allows for the luxury of philosophy. But nature has one last surprise. Around 8,200 years ago, a final pulse of meltwater from a collapsing ice dam in North America causes a brief, sharp, cold snap, the 8.2 kiloyear event. It is a stutter, a flashback to the bad old days. We see the coastal settlements hit by a massive tsunami, the Storegga slide, caused by an underwater landslide off the coast of Norway. A wall of water crashes into the settlements of Scotland and the North Sea basin, wiping out the remaining inhabitants of Doggerland's archipelago. It is a brutal reminder that the Holocene is not perfectly stable, just more stable. But humanity, hardened by the Younger Dryas, weathers this storm with a grit born of experience. They rebuild, they move their camps, they keep going. The forests thicken, the rivers find their courses, and the seasons settle into the rhythm we know today. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. The violent oscillations are over. The stage is set for the rise of the great river civilizations. The Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Indus, all are fed by the stable rains of this new epoch. The seeds planted by the desperate Natufians have spread, evolving into wheat and barley that can support cities. We watch as the first mud brick walls rise in Jericho, a physical barrier against the wild, a declaration that humanity is here to stay. The nomadic spirit is not dead, but it has been tamed, channeled into trade and exploration rather than endless wandering. As we drift away from the green, breathing continent of Europe, looking down at the smoke rising from thousands of hearths, we realize that the Younger Dryas was the fire that forged us. It stripped away the easy abundance, forced us to innovate, to bind together, to look at a blade of grass and see a loaf of bread. The Holocene is the reward for that survival. The ice has retreated to the poles, leaving the center stage to us. But as we look at the thriving forests and the rising tides, we must remember that the ice is not gone. It is merely sleeping. The interglacial is a gift, a warm anomaly in a cold universe, and we are the caretakers of its fragile, blooming garden. The journey is nearly complete. We have walked the frozen steppes, swum the stalled currents, and watched the world burn and bloom in turn. Now we pull back, ascending higher and higher until the earth is a marble of blue and white swirling in the velvet dark, the scars of the Ice Age healed over by the green bandage of the Holocene. From this cosmic vantage point, the Younger Dryas appears not as a disaster, but as a pivot point, the hinge upon which the door of history swung open. It is the period that asked the hardest question humanity had ever faced. Who will you become when the world tries to kill you? And our answer, written in stone points, bone needles, and the first grains of domesticated wheat, was unequivocally, we will become the masters of our own fate. We reflect on the legacy of this time. It is etched into our very DNA. The genetic bottlenecks of the era, where populations shrank to tiny bands of survivors, purged the gene pool, leaving behind the resilient, the clever, and the cooperative. We are the descendants of the ones who didn't give up, the ones who figured out how to sew the parka, how to hunt the bison, how to share the last scrap of meat. The psychological shadow of the ice remains too. Our fascination with the apocalypse, our deep-seated fear of the dark and the cold, our myths of floods and fires, these are likely the cultural echoes of the trauma our ancestors endured. The story of the Great Flood, found in cultures from Mesopotamia to the Americas, may not be a divine punishment, but a collective memory of the rising tides that swallowed Doggerland and the Sunda Shelf. The Garden of Eden might be the folk memory of the warm Booling Alarud, a paradise lost to the sudden frost, a golden age we have been trying to recreate ever since. Scientific debates continue to swirl around this era like the winds of the jet stream. The impact hypothesis remains a polarized battlefield, with new papers firing back and forth every year, arguing over platinum spikes and magnetic spherules. The The cause of the megafaunal extinction is still litigated in lecture halls, with the blame shifting between the spear and the climate. But these arguments, heated as they are, miss the poetic truth of the era. It doesn't matter why the world changed as much as it matters that it changed and we survived it. The Younger Dryas teaches us humility. It reminds us that the climate is a beast that can wake up at any moment. We are currently living in a super-interglacial, a period of exceptional stability that has allowed us to build skyscrapers and the internet. But the ice cores whisper that this stability is the exception, not the rule. The flickering switches of the past are a warning that the Earth's systems are non-linear, capable of tipping points that we are only beginning to understand. Yet, there is hope in this history. If the Younger Dryas was a test, we passed it with flying colors. We didn't just survive, we leveled up. The pressure of the cold forged the Neolithic Revolution. Without the stress of the drying Levant, the Natufians might never have planted that first seed. Without the disappearance of the mammoth, the Clovis people might never have diversified into the cultures that populated the Americas. Challenge, it seems, is the mother of invention. We are a species that thrives on the edge, a creature that needs a little bit of trouble to reach its potential. The Ice Age didn't break us, it made us. We descend one last time, not to a specific time or place, but to the feeling of the era. Imagine standing on a ridge at the very end of the period, the sun warm on your face, the smell of melting snow and blooming heather in the air. You look back at the glacier, a retreating wall of white that has dominated your life and the lives of your ancestors. It is shrinking, defeated by the sun. You look forward, into the valley, where the forests are rising and the rivers are running clear. You do not know that you are stepping into the Holocene. You do not know that your descendants will walk on the moon. You only know that the winter is over and the world is new. You take a breath, filling your lungs with the air of a planet that has decided to let you live. You pick up your child, pointing to the green chute pushing through the mud, and you walk down into the valley, leaving the ice behind, carrying the fire of human resilience into the future. The story of the Younger Dryas is the story of us. It is the bridge between the ancient instinctual world of the predator and the modern constructed world of the cultivator. It is the crucible that burned away the dross and left behind the steel of the human spirit. As the final credits of this epic roll, we see not an end, but a beginning. The ice melts, the waters rise, and the stage is set for the long, complex, and beautiful drama of civilization. The mystery is not fully solved. The Earth keeps her secrets well. But the evidence is there, in the rocks, in the ice, and in the beating heart of every human being who looks at a winter sky and knows, deep down, that the spring will come. And now, as we leave the ancient ridges and the retreating ice, let the vast timeline of history dissolve into the soft, quiet darkness of your own room. The storms of the past have settled. The winds that howled across the tundra have quieted to a gentle whisper, a soothing hush that wraps around you like a warm, heavy blanket. The great mammoths are sleeping in the earth. The fires of the Natufians have burned down to glowing, peaceful embers, and the restless oceans have found their calm, rhythmic tide. You are safe here, anchored in the warmth of the present, far from the biting cold of the ancient world. Let your breathing slow down, matching the deep, steady pulse of the sleeping planet. Inhale the peace of the stillness. Exhale the tension of the day. The history is written, the struggles are over, and all that remains is the gentle drift of time, carrying you softly, slowly, into the velvet embrace of sleep. The stars are watching over you, just as they watched over our ancestors, steadfast and serene. Let go. Drift. The world is quiet. You are safe. Good night.